Nobody at the Linden County Annual Precision Shooting Championship paid much attention to the old man who pulled into the gravel parking lot 20 minutes before registration closed. He drove a sun-bleached Ford F-150 with a cracked side mirror and a faded 75th Ranger Regiment patch sticker on the rear bumper, the kind you couldn't read from more than 3 feet away. He climbed out slowly, the way men do when their knees have earned their complaints, and stood for a moment squinting at the range complex spread across the fairgrounds like he was taking inventory of something. He wore tan work pants, a dark green flannel shirt, and a ball cap with no logo on it, no range bag, no rifle case, no equipment at all, just an old man standing in a parking lot on a Saturday in September, looking like he might have wandered over from the pie-eating contest one field over. His name was Virgil Lester Sutton. He was 74 years old. He had driven 46 miles from the house, where he had lived alone for the past 5 years, since the cancer took Loretta in the spring of 2019. He had attended this championship exactly once before, not to compete, but to sit in the bleachers with Loretta the summer before she was diagnosed, eating funnel cake and watching strangers squeeze triggers and argue about ballistics. She had laughed at a man who'd driven 300 miles just to shoot at steel plates in a cow pasture. Then she'd bought him a cold lemonade and held his hand the rest of the afternoon. That was the kind of woman she was. He hadn't been back since, not until today. The man running registration was Boyd Corrigan, a former Army Ranger himself, though 20 years younger than Virgil, and built like a man who'd never quite let go of his PT schedule. Boyd had owned the Corrigan Shooting Complex for 9 years and ran the championship as a community event, open to amateurs and professionals both. He looked up from his laptop when Virgil approached the table. "Afternoon," Virgil said. "Still time to enter?" Boyd glanced at the clock. "Barely. You got your own rifle?" "No." Boyd looked at him more carefully. Most people who drove 46 miles to a precision shooting championship brought their own rifle. "We've got loaners, standard issue Remington 700, nothing modified. Most competitors bring their own because the loaners are—" "That's fine," Virgil said. "The 700's fine." Boyd handed him the form. Virgil filled it out in steady handwriting, paid the entry fee in exact cash, and walked toward the range without another word. The competition was divided into 3 distance categories: 500 yards, 750 yards, and the open long-range class at 1,000. The long-range class was the one that drew the real competitors, and this year's field was headlined by Chase Remington, a 27-year-old shooter from Nashville who'd built a following of 400,000 people on social media by posting range sessions with high production value slow-motion footage and gear reviews that read like love letters to ballistic coefficients. Chase arrived in a custom-wrapped pickup with magnetic sponsor decals on the doors. His rifle cost $11,000 and was fitted with a scope that cost nearly as much. His girlfriend, Haley, had a Canon camera and a ring light and had been filming since the parking lot. Chase's 2 training partners, Tate and Kyle, neither competing, just orbiting, shadowed him from station to station like they were part of his equipment. He was good. Genuinely, demonstrably good. His first stage groupings at 500 yards were surgical, and he shot with the relaxed confidence of someone who had done this 10,000 times. The small crowd near the 1,000-yard line watched him with the quiet admiration reserved for obvious talent. Nobody was watching Lane 7, where the old man in the green flannel shirt had set up with the range's loaner, Remington 700. Ryan Kelso, the 22-year-old range safety officer on duty for the long-range class, had brought Virgil the rifle with the practiced disinterest of someone doing a task for the 5th time that morning. "She pulls a little left at distance," Ryan said. "Most guys compensate about 6 clicks right." Virgil accepted the rifle and ran his hands along it without looking up, checking the action, the bolt throw, the trigger weight. His hands moved without hesitation. Ryan watched him for a second, then looked back at Chase's lane. 6 clicks right, Virgil said. "I'll keep that in mind." He didn't make any adjustments. The first stage of the long-range class was 750 yards. 5 shots scored by grouping. Chase went third. His 5 shots landed in a cluster the size of a tennis ball, and the electronic display drew applause from the bleachers. His coach, a former competitive shooter named Dan who got paid to stand behind Chase and say things like "left shoulder, breathe out," gave a satisfied nod. Haley zoomed in. Virgil went 7th. He settled into the prone position behind the Remington 700 with a deliberate economy that you only develop over decades. No wasted adjustments, no nervous fidgeting with the bipod, no theatre. His first shot went downrange and the steel plate rang. Bullseye. Ryan glanced at the display. The hit was centered, clean. He wrote something on his clipboard and almost didn't look up for the second shot. The second shot landed so close to the first that the two marks overlapped on the scoring display. Ryan looked up. The third shot was tighter still, the fourth the fifth. When the stage was scored, Virgil's 5-shot grouping measured less than 4 inches at 750 yards. That was not the kind of thing that happened with a loner rifle. One of the older range volunteers, a man in his early 60s named Merle Dunleavy, who'd been helping run the Linden County Championship for 11 years, and who wore a Vietnam vet cap year-round, summer and winter both, walked slowly to the display without anyone asking him to. He stood in front of it for a long time. Then he looked at Virgil, who was already clearing spent brass from the bolt without ceremony. Then he looked back at the display. Merle didn't say anything yet. He just watched. Chase Remington had noticed, though he didn't let it show. He'd caught the scorecard out of the corner of his eye, done the math, and felt something cold and specific settle in his stomach. He walked over to where Tate and Kyle were standing. "Who's the old guy in lane 7? "No idea," Tate said. "Came in with nothing, using the house gun." Chase looked at the lane 7 display again. "With the house gun," he said. "Probably just luck," Kyle said. 5 shots at 750 isn't the main event anyway. Chase nodded like he agreed and walked back to his position, but he kept watching lane 7. He couldn't stop watching. The long-range stage, 1,000 yards, was the championship centerpiece. 10 shots, scored by grouping and centering. The record for the open class had been set 11 years ago by a former Army competitive shooter named Neville Atchison, who'd used a custom-built rifle with hand-loaded match cartridges. A grouping of 9.5 inches at 1,000 yards. It was the kind of record that serious precision shooters talked about and quietly believed was permanent. Chase went second. His 10 shots at 1,000 yards produced a grouping just over 12 inches, the best of the day so far, clean enough to hold the lead. He pumped his fist and Haley zoomed in. Dan, his coach, gave a quiet, satisfied nod, and Chase smiled and rolled his shoulders back. He was still smiling when he walked past lane 7 on the way back to his position. "Listen," Chase said, not unkindly, but in the practiced tone of someone offering unsolicited practical advice, "you really should have brought your own equipment if you wanted to be competitive in the long-range class. That loner has nothing for moe consistency at 1,000 yards. No offense." Virgil looked at him. His face carried that quality of permanent stillness. Not coldness, but the kind of settled gravity that looks like sadness until you understand it is something else entirely. "No offense taken," Virgil said. Chase nodded, satisfied, and moved on. Merle Dunleavy had heard the exchange. He stood 15 feet away, with his arms crossed and his face flat, the way men stand when they choose not to say the thing they're thinking. He was still watching when Virgil's turn came. Virgil settled behind the Remington 700 at 1,000 yards. He loaded the magazine with the unhurried patience of someone who had performed this operation in complete darkness, in rain, under circumstances that made a county fair range look like a living room. He checked the wind. There wasn't much. A 5-mile crosswind from the southwest, the kind that most shooters at this distance would dial for, and most shooters at this distance would still miscalculate. He looked at the flags, looked at the grass, looked at the sky above the target line. He didn't touch the scope. The first shot broke clean. The steel target at 1,000 yards rang with that flat, solid percussion that serious shooters recognized the way musicians recognize a tuned note. The display showed a centered hit. Ryan Kelso was already on his feet. The second shot hit so close to the first that the display registered a single hole for nearly 4 seconds before the scoring algorithm separated them. People near the bleachers began to notice. One person said something to the person next to them. Then 6 people were watching. Then 15. Then the whole bleacher row had turned. Third shot, fourth, fifth. By the 6th shot, Chase Remington had stopped talking mid-sentence and was staring at the Lane 7 display with his expensive rifle hanging forgotten in his hands. By the 8th shot, the entire range had gone quiet. Not the polite silence of sportsmanship, the involuntary silence of people who have stopped breathing because something is happening that they do not have words for. Virgil fired his 9th shot, then his 10th. The range held its silence for 4 full seconds. Then Ryan Kelso said in a voice that came out smaller than he intended, "Sir, that grouping is..." He checked the measurement twice, 4.7 inches, at 1,000 yards. The 11-year record had not just been broken, it had been cut in half. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Merle Dunleavy walked to lane 7 with deliberate steps, and when he got there, he stopped and looked at Virgil the way a man looks at something he thought existed only in stories. "I need to ask your name," Merle said quietly, "your full name." Virgil set the rifle down with care. "Sutton," he said, "Virgil Sutton." Merle's jaw tightened. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his phone with hands that weren't entirely steady. He typed, scrolled, stopped. "Sergeant First Class Virgil Lester Sutton," Merle read, and his voice had changed completely. It carried the weight of a man reading from a wall. 75th Ranger Regiment, Vietnam, 2 tours, Gulf War, Silver Star, Distinguished Sniper Badge. He paused. "They called you the Sundowner." The name landed in the air like a struck bell. Haley's camera pivoted slowly from Chase to lane 7. Ryan whispered something that was not quite a word. Chase Remington said, "I'm sorry, the what?" In the 75th Ranger Regiment, they still told the story of the Sundowner the way instructors tell stories when they want to illustrate the difference between shooting and operatings. In the spring of 1991, during ground combat operations in southern Iraq, a 12-man Ranger element had been cut off by a Republican Guard mechanized column, moving along a ridgeline at a distance no standard-issue sniper equipment was rated for. The element's sniper, Sergeant Virgil Sutton, 23 years old, with a scope fogged by a blown seal and a bipod held together with rigger's tape, had made a shot at a range, later surveyed at 1,340 yards, destroying the lead vehicle, stopping the column's advance long enough for the element to break contact and reach extraction. The official after-action report described the shot as improbable under prevailing conditions, which meant it shouldn't have been possible, which meant there was no good explanation for it, except that the man behind the rifle was something outside the range of normal. When the after-action officer asked how he'd ranged the shot without functional glass, Sutton said he'd calculated off the sun angle and the lead vehicle's shadow length. He'd estimated the range to within 40 yards. He'd been right. Someone called him the Sundowner after that. The name followed him through the rest of his service, through the networks and the veterans' circles, and the institutional memory of a regiment that had been keeping records of its own for decades. He never gave interviews about it. He declined 2 book deals and a documentary inquiry. He finished his service in 1998, moved back to Tennessee, married a woman named Loretta, who taught 3rd grade and laughed at men who drove 300 miles to shoot at steel plates in pastures, and disappeared from military life so completely that the stories about him began to feel like they might be myth. They were not myth. Boyd Corrigan had come out of the equipment shed when his radio crackled. He stood looking at the lane 7 display, then at Virgil, then at Merle. Boyd had spent 9 years around shooters of every level, and he had a finely developed instinct for who was real. "Sergeant Sutton," Boyd said. Virgil looked at him. "Why here, why today, after all this time?" Virgil was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the range, at the steel targets standing at their distances, at the flat Tennessee fields beyond them going gold in the September afternoon light. "My wife used to bring me to this fairgrounds," he said, "every September. She passed 5 years ago." A pause. "I haven't been back. I didn't know if I'd want to come back. But I woke up this morning and thought she'd probably tell me I'd been hiding long enough." Nobody said anything. "She was right about most things," Virgil said simply. Chase Remington was standing 8 feet away. He had the look of a man in his late 20s who has spent several years carefully building a version of himself, and has just understood, clearly and without room for argument, that the version he's been building is missing something important. "I told you the equipment wasn't good enough," Chase said. His voice was low. He wasn't making a joke. He was saying the thing out loud because it needed to be said out loud. I said that to you like I knew something. I'm sorry, sir. I'm genuinely sorry. Virgil looked at him for a moment. Whatever he saw in Chase's face, it was enough. You didn't know, Virgil said. Most people don't. Don't make that the lesson. Then, what's the lesson? Virgil thought about how to say it. The shot doesn't care how much your equipment costs. A shot is a question the rifle asks and the shooter answers. You answer with your nerves, your breath, your judgment, your understanding of everything between you and the target. The equipment transmits the answer. If the answer is wrong, no scope on earth corrects it. He looked at Chase steadily. You've been investing in the transmission, Virgil said. That's not wrong. But somewhere along the way, you started believing the transmission was the answer. That's going to cost you eventually. Maybe it already has. Chase's coach Dan, who had said more or less the same thing in different language for 2 years, looked at his feet. Word spread the way it does in rural communities, not through social media first, but through actual phone calls, through veterans organizations and shooting clubs, and the networks that form between men who served together and never entirely stopped checking in. Within 90 minutes, vehicles had appeared in the Corrigan parking lot that hadn't been there before. A man in his late 50s in a VFW post jacket, a retired master sergeant who'd driven 60 miles after getting a call from someone who'd been at the range, a woman in her early 60s, the wife of a ranger who'd served with Virgil in the Gulf and who couldn't drive himself anymore, his legs being what they were after everything. So she drove for him. She shook Virgil's hand and said, "He cried when I called him. He told me to tell you he's been thinking about you for 30 years. A retired colonel named Don Bassett arrived last, and when he found Virgil near the long-range line, he stopped in front of him and looked at him for a moment before speaking. I wrote my thesis at Command and General Staff around the 1991 Ranger engagement in southern Iraq," Colonel Bassett said. "I cited the ballistic analysis of a 1,340-yard shot with degraded equipment and wrote 3 pages about why it was the most remarkable documented instance of operational marksmanship in the Gulf War theater." He paused. "I cited it without knowing the shooter's name. Nobody I contacted could give it to me." Virgil said nothing. "You've been here the whole time," Bassett said. 46 miles east, Virgil said. Bassett shook his hand with both of his. "I used to wonder privately whether you were a real person or whether the account had been embellished over the years, the way legends get embellished." "I'm a real person," Virgil said. "I can see that," Bassett said. He was smiling and his eyes were bright. "I can absolutely see that." Boyd Corrigan had gone into the equipment shed and returned with a wooden plaque, the hand-routed award he kept for the annual championship winner, which he'd written over in marker, because there was no time to do it properly, and which he held up in front of the crowd that had gathered without anyone organizing a crowd. "This is not the way I'd have preferred to do this," Boyd said. "But I'm not waiting." He looked around at the veterans, and the competitors, and the volunteers, and the people who'd come because word got around in the way word gets around. Sergeant First Class Virgil Lester Sutton, Linden County Annual Precision Shooting Championship, 1,000-yard open class, 4.7 inches, permanent record. He held the plaque out. "And we're designating Lane 7 the Sutton Lane. It'll be on the signage before next Saturday." Virgil tried to say something. Boyd kept talking. "You've been driving 46 miles to this county for years," Boyd said. "Living here, right here, and we didn't know who you were. That's on us. We know now." Virgil took the plaque. He held it in both hands, looking at it with that expression. People were beginning to understand. Not sadness, though it resembled sadness. Something more complicated, something that had been compressed over a very long time and had not yet found its shape. Merle Dunleavy put a hand on his shoulder. "She brought you back here," Merle said quietly. "Loretta, today of all days. You know that, right? You stayed away 5 years and today you came back. That's not accident, brother." Virgil exhaled slowly through his nose. "No," he said, "I don't think it is either." The afternoon stretched long the way September afternoons do in Tennessee, warm enough to keep you outside, cool enough to make you glad you stayed. The competition officially wrapped, but nobody went home. Veterans gathered in small groups, trading unit names, trading the kind of dark humor that survives contact with things that otherwise can't be survived. The younger shooters, Chase and Tate and Kyle, and a handful of others from the long-range class, stayed too, some out of curiosity, some out of something they hadn't named yet. Ryan Kelso found Virgil sitting alone at a picnic table near the 500-yard line. He sat down without asking permission, which Virgil respected. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "When you were shooting at 1,000 yards, what were you thinking about?" Virgil was quiet for a while. He looked at the target line in the fading light. "I was thinking about her," he said finally. "About Loretta, about the last time we sat in those bleachers right over there. She told me I took everything too seriously. She said I'd forgotten how to be in a place without assessing it." He paused. "She was right. I'd been doing it my whole life, entering every room like it might need to be defended. She was the only person who ever made me forget to do that." Ryan didn't have anything to say to that. He was wise enough to know it, and he just sat there, which turned out to be the right thing. Chase Remington was the last competitor to leave the grounds. He'd sent Haley to the car 40 minutes earlier. He'd told Tate and Kyle to go on. He found Virgil at the picnic table and waited until Ryan excused himself before sitting down across from him. "I meant the apology," Chase said. "I wanted to make sure you knew it wasn't just embarrassment talking. I was dismissive to you because you didn't look like what I thought a serious shooter looked like. That's a problem in me, not something you did wrong." Virgil waited. "I've been competing for 6 years, Chase said. The sponsorships, the cameras, the platform. I tell myself it's about the craft. But if it was really about the craft..." He stopped, looked at his hands. "If it was really about the craft, I wouldn't need 400,000 people watching it to feel like it matters." Virgil looked at him for a long moment. "Some people need an audience," he said without judgment. "There's nothing wrong with needing one. The question is what you're using it for." "What do you mean?" "The audience should be a reason to reach higher, not a mirror to confirm you're already there." Virgil leaned back slightly. "You're a talented shooter. I watched your stage today. Genuinely good. But somewhere along the way, you started using the cameras to show people what you can already do instead of using them to show yourself what you still can't." He paused. "Those are very different cameras." Chase was quiet for a long time. Out on the range, the light was going. The steel targets stood at their distances in the dusk like punctuation marks at the ends of very long sentences. "What would you do," Chase said, "if you were starting over, if you were my age with everything I've built, and you had to rebuild it right?" "I'd find someone I couldn't beat yet," Virgil said, "not to copy them. To understand why. Watching and understanding aren't the same thing, but most people think they are." Chase nodded. Then he said, more quietly, "Would you let me come back? Not to compete, just to be here when you shoot. I want to see what stillness actually looks like from the outside." Virgil studied him. In 6 years of asking for things, sponsorships, access, introductions, partnerships, Chase had never asked anything this directly, this plainly, with nothing behind it. The plainness of it was the thing that mattered. Virgil could hear the difference. "I come out Sundays," Virgil said. 7 in the morning before the day gets loud. Boyd gives me the key." He looked at Chase. "You want to come watch, I won't stop you, but bring your rifle. I'm not here to perform." "I'll be here," Chase said. "We'll see," Virgil said, but there was no edge in it. Merle caught him in the parking lot before Virgil made it to his truck. "You doing all right?" Merle said. Virgil considered it honestly. "Better than I've been in a while," he said. It felt true when he said it. "You should have been out here years ago. The community, the guys, you've been alone out there and we didn't know." "I know," Virgil said. "Loretta wouldn't have wanted that." "She made that very clear," Virgil said. "Even near the end she was clear. She told me not to turn grief into a full-time occupation." He almost smiled. "She had a way of saying things I didn't want to hear that made me laugh anyway. I haven't met another person who could do that." Merle exhaled. "What a woman." "What a woman," Virgil said. They stood in the parking lot a moment longer, the way men stand when the main thing has been said and they're deciding if there's anything left. There wasn't. Merle shook his hand, held it a beat longer than a regular handshake, and let go. Virgil drove home the same way he'd come. 46 miles, back roads, the hills going purple-grey in the early dark. He had the plaque on the passenger seat, propped against the door where Loretta used to sit, angled just enough that he could see it in his peripheral vision without turning to look. He didn't play the radio. He drove in quiet, which had been the same for 5 years, except that tonight the quiet had different company. Not grief, not emptiness, something closer to presence. The feeling of a thing completed that had been waiting to be completed. The feeling of having let people see him when he had been hidden for so long he'd nearly forgotten he was hiding. He pulled into his driveway as the last colour left the sky. He sat in the truck for a moment, looked at the plaque. Virgil Lester Sutton, Linden County Annual Precision Shooting Championship. 1,000-yard open class record permanent. Happy now, he said quietly. The truck was very still. He could almost hear her laughing. The following Sunday at 6:58 in the morning, Chase Remington's truck was already in the Corrigan parking lot when Virgil pulled in. Chase stood leaning against the hood with a thermos of coffee and his rifle in a case at his feet, wearing plain jeans and a jacket with no logos on anything. He looked different without the cameras. Younger somehow, more uncertain, which in Virgil's experience was a very good sign. Virgil got out of his truck, looked at the kid. "You're early," he said. "Figured I better be," Chase said. Virgil unlocked the gate and pushed it open into the still morning air. "Get your rifle. We'll start at 500. "What are we working on?" "Stillness," Virgil said. "We're working on stillness." Chase picked up the case and followed him through the gate, out onto the quiet range in the early light, where the steel targets stood at their distances in the cool September air, and the mountains held the valley in both hands, and everything remained possible for a man who finally understood what he was protecting. Somewhere a third-grade teacher was laughing. Virgil was almost certain of it.